This is an update on creating a content management system from scratch. So I've pretty much finished the front end and I've created all the user control modules for all of the pages that exist so far. So those modules are at least hooked into the URL routing class, um, but the modules themselves haven't necessarily been fleshed out and certainly haven't been hooked up to the back end. I've modified the look and feel a bit because after some testing, I realized that some of the things that I liked on their own, I didn't like in a more dynamic setting. So, for example, like where these tiles here across the top, where they scale and things like that, that looks great. But when you start clicking on them, it started having odd effects as I was navigating pages. So I made some of the effects more subtle than they were in the past. There's also a uh, toolbar here on the left. So right now we're on the back end of the CMS, and these 10 cards are like the main modules for the back end. And then in addition to that, there's also a default view here that's not really tied to any of these modules. The idea is that if you're on the front end and you enter the back end from a particular page, that page gets tracked. And I haven't quite hooked that up, but that's the idea, is that page would be tracked here, and all of these three buttons would be linked to that page. So for example, you could edit settings and security for that page, edit the content for that page, or create a child page of the one that you were on when you navigated to the back end. So the idea is the red button would take you to the pages module with that page selected, and the green button would take you to the content module with that page selected. The blue button would also take you to the pages module, but specifically to the subsection of it where you would be creating a page, and then it would pre-populate in the hierarchy, it would pre-populate the parent page to be equal to the one that you were on when you entered the back end. So a lot of words, but three buttons, a couple icons. I tried to make it as simple as possible, and that'll be a recurring theme throughout this project. Is there'll be a lot of details to make it happen, but at the end of it all, I want to try and make it pretty simple to use. So back to this toolbar here on the left-hand side. So this is the back end, and it has this home icon to take you over to the front end. And then on the front end, you have a slightly different toolbar where you can click on the gear to get back to the back end, so you can toggle back and forth. So now we're on the front end, back end, front end. And then on the front end, you also have this pencil icon to be able to edit specific instances of modules. So not the modules themselves, but the actual instances where they refer to specific content. And then I've also hooked up the rest of the links in the header and footer. So I've hooked up a sitemap. Now, of course, the sitemap module doesn't contain anything except for a heading that says sitemap. Site configuration is just another link to the back end. And then attributions does have a module that's temporary. In the future, the attributions module will probably contain a bunch of cards more similar to the main menu here on the back end. But for now, it's just a list of icons. And if I bring up the file system here, and I go to the CMS folder and then images, these are all the images. A lot of them have been borrowed. I would say pretty much everything that's selected there has been either borrowed or the original source material was borrowed, and then I significantly modified it. There are a couple here that I have significantly modified, but I'm still referring to all the source documents in this list. And I went ahead and created my own background image that was a little bit nicer than the previous one, where I was just using the paintbrush tool to just paste a bunch of circles and some random colors. So this one's a little bit more subtle texture. It's more like what I had it envisioned originally. So while we're looking at the file system, I'll mention real quick, I've moved a bunch of things around. So I tried to move as much as possible into the CMS folder. Now, because I wanted to have all the code non-compiled and editable in a text editor, I have to keep this app code directory at the root. It's just one of those magic folders, so I could not move that into the CMS folder. And then these other two are intended for the users to drop files in there. So media and custom user modules. And then in the app code, there's still just these three classes here. I've definitely modified them a bit, but I haven't expanded beyond those three yet. And then in the CMS folder, most of these are very familiar. Style, scripts. In the scripts folder, I also added a file to create a database. So this is where I will eventually have the SQL to have it so that given a server and a port and a database name and credentials to connect to the database, it would run the necessary script to create and populate all the tables and columns. And, and so at first run, the CMS is going to look inside of this data folder. And we need to make sure that the app pool user in IIS has the ability to write to the data folder. And it's going to be looking for this settings.json. And the intention is that eventually this will be holding various things, including a database connection string. But I'm going to delete that right now. So the CMS is going to see that that's not there. And if I go back to the home page, you'll see the home page is a little bit different. Like the sidebar is gone and the top menu is gone, and it's just asking for information to connect to the database. And so what it's going to do eventually, once it's hooked up, is it's going to then create that file if it doesn't exist, or modify the file to add a certain setting. Now we see here that it has written a file, and it's just written the contents 1, 2, 3, 4, just as a proof of concept that it has permissions to write the file. But eventually that will hold a connection string, and then it will be executing a script to create all the tables, and then those tables will be used in the project. So now that that file has been temporarily created with the contents 1, 2, 3, 4, I'm going to refresh, and so now we can see that that's basically representing that we've now created our database. At least, in theory, that's the differentiator that we're looking at, is whether or not that file exists. And so assuming that the file exists and we can actually connect to the database, then you're going to see what we see on screen, which, where we're going to actually see menus and toolbars, and then eventually we'll see content in the center as well. And I have the search hooked up, so if I type something in here, then that pulls up the search results page, which pulls in the search results module, which just has some sample content right now. It's not completed yet, but it is hooked up in the sense that it's actually routing from this input field to a different page that's pulling in this module. It's just that the module isn't actually looking at any content. Everything else is hooked up, and similar to search results, everything is hooked into its own page, which is hooked into its own module, but those modules just don't have a lot of content yet. So that is pretty much where things are at. And each of these 10, if I didn't go through this already, they are also hooked into their own version of the page, which pulls in their own module. You can see the breadcrumb navigation here is getting updated for all these pages on the back end. And you'll notice that the content itself is actually changing as well, showing that it's pulling in different modules, even though most of the modules just have this copied and pasted stuff that I haven't gone in and edited yet. So yeah, that is where the project's at. So I think at this point, there's really not much left to do other than just kind of scaffold out the HTML for the various modules, and then start hooking the modules up to the back end, and maybe actually run through the script where it's going to create tables and columns. And then at that point, it'll be a lot of interfacing with the database and just doing a lot of logic. So we'll keep pushing forward in future videos. Thank you for watching.